A night that shattered expectations when Colbert's smirk met Kennedy's steel hold on tight. Because what went down on the Ed Sullivan Theater stage was no ordinary late-night talk show. It was a clash of giants that left everyone stunned. Picture the Stephen Colbert, the master of biting sarcasm, thinks he's about to grill Senator John Kennedy live on national TV. He's got a stack of blue cue cards, his sly grin, and an audience ready for laughs, but the moment Kennedy steps out, something changes the air. Sparks the jokes, turn the knives, the smiles hide a fight. What unfolds isn't comedy. It's a verbal showdown. Every question is a setup, every answer is a strike. By the end, this wasn't just a reckoning. It was a wake-up call that left viewers breathless. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word. This is a kind of TV that doesn't just entertain, it transforms you. The lights in the Ed Sullivan Theater burned brighter than a summer sun. That night, the crowd was alive, buzzing with energy, their excitement bouncing off the walls. The band was sharp, their notes crisp, and ready, every camera locked onto one man. Stephen Colbert, the king of late-night irony, leaned back in his chair, that signature smirk dancing on his lips. His sidekick announcer, John Batiste, hyped the crowd one last time, his voice booming through the studio. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for the man who makes senators sweat and presidents squirm. Stephen Colbert. The cheers crashed like a wave rolling through the theater. Colbert waved, soaking it all, and then leaned into the mic, his voice full of mischief tonight. He teased, we got a special guest, a man who sounds like he walked out a Mark Twain novel and straight into Congress. Please welcome Senator John Kennedy. The applause roared again, a mix of excitement and curiosity. The band kicked into a Southern blues riff, the kind that feels like a playful nudge. Then Kennedy emerged from backstage. He walked slowly, his suit slightly rumpled, his face calm but unreadable. He gave a polite nod to the crowd, then settled into the chair across from Colbert, folded his hands like a man who's been in fights before and knows how to take a hit. Colbert didn't wait, Senator. He started, his tone light but sharp. You've got a reputation for, let's say, colorful phrases ever worry people. Remember your one-liners more than your policies. Kennedy's lips twitched into a faint smile, the kind that says, I see your move only when folks think comedy's the same as journalism. He replied, his Louisiana drawl slow and deliberate. The audience laughed. But it wasn't the easy rolling laughter Colbert expected. It was sharper, like they weren't sure who landed the first blow. Colbert tilted his head, his grin widening. Well, I'm a comedian, Senator, and between you and Marjorie Taylor Greene, you're writing half my monologues. I could retire early. Kennedy didn't miss a step. Bless your heart, Stephen, he said, his voice smooth as bourbon. If my words are paying your rent, you owe me a thank you note. A ripple ran through the room, part amusement, part tension. Colbert raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting the counter so fast. He said, leaning forward, speaking of rent, I hear you've been busy defending your donors. Lately got to keep those lights on in Louisiana, right? Kennedy's eyes hardened just a fraction, but his smile stayed, and someone's got to keep the cameras rolling when the truth walks. And he shot back the audience. When quiet, Colbert smirked, pretending not to notice the shift. He tapped a stack of cue cards. Let's take a trip down memory lane. Showed the big screen behind him flicker to life. A montage of Kennedy's greatest hits played, grilling witnesses in Senate hearings, quoting scripture, snapping at reporters, tossing out one-liners that cut like a blade. The edit was brutal, chopped to make him look like a caricature designed for cheap laughs. When it faded, Colbert leaned forward, his voice dripping with mock curiosity. Senator, ever think about getting an acting coach? Your hearings look like auditions for Duck Dynasty Capitol Hill edition. The crowd laughed. But Kennedy didn't flinch. He waited, letting the chuckles die, then spoke evenly. Stephen the First, don't act. I represent you. Tell jokes about problems. I try to fix them. The laughter stopped cold. Colbert fired back, his tone sharper now. Oh, come on, half of Washington's performance, and you're one of the best showmen out there. Kennedy's drawl thick and deliberate and heavy, maybe. So, but where I come from, a man's words mean something. I'd rather sound like a country fool telling the truth than a city genius selling it. That line hit like a thunderbolt. The crowd didn't laugh. They didn't cheer. They just stared. Colbert's smile froze, his fingers tightening on his cue cards. He sat back, blinking once, twice. When he muttered, looks like we're live. The tension in the studio thick and heavy as a summer storm. Colbert leaned forward, his voice turning precise. Senator, you quote scripture on the Senate floor more than some preachers do in church. Are you legislating faith or hiding behind? The crowd chuckled, a few laughs too loud, the kind that sting. Colbert smiled, satisfied with a jab. But Kennedy didn't budge. He sat back calm. As a still lake, faith isn't a hiding place, Stephen. He said, it's a compass you don't have to believe in mine for it to point north. That landed harder than Colbert expected. He tried to mask it with a smirk. Sounds noble, but isn't that just saying my way or the highway you wrap your beliefs in folksy charm? But it's still control, isn't it? Kennedy's lips twitched into a half smile. If your way's headed off a cliff, Stephen, it'll take another road. Gasps rippled through the audience. The band stopped fidgeting. Even Colbert's grin faltered just for a second. He chuckled, trying to regain his footing. So you're the moral GPS of America now. Kennedy's reply was quiet, but razor sharp. No, sir. Just trying to keep folks from pretending the ditch is a destination. That cracked the room open, not laughter, but murmurs, shifting seats, the uneasy hum of a crowd, watching someone lose control. Colbert leaned back, masking his discomfort with charm. Well, Senator, I've heard plenty of sermons on this stage, but you're the first to bring a pulpit. Kennedy met his gaze, unflinching. I don't preach, Stephen the First. Remind, you call it politics, I call it. Perspective. For a moment, the studio lights seemed to dim, the air heavy with something unspoken. Colbert looked at his cards, but he wasn't reading them anymore. The crowd waited half, expecting a punchline. That never came. Colbert shuffled his cue cards, his easy humor gone. His voice turned sharp, polished the tone he used. We want to strike deep, Senator. He said, reading directly from the card. You once said the federal government spends money like a drunk uncle at a casino. Is that leadership or just theater? Crowd laughed, but it was nervous, unsure who to root for. Kennedy leaned forward, his eyes calm but unyielding. If truth sounds like theater, he said slowly, then maybe Washington's forgotten what honesty sounds like. That quiet line hit harder than a shout. Colbert raised his eyebrows, but the smirk was gone. He leaned closer, pushing back. So you think truth belongs to you, that you're the only one brave enough to tell it? Kennedy's voice didn't rise, it sank steady, and certain. No, Stephen, but I'm one of the few still paying the price to tell it. The room went still again. Colbert opened his mouth to fire back, but Kennedy cut through the tension like a blade. You're used to punchlines, he said. Use the consequences. The audience murmured, that low, involuntary sound, a shift in the air. Colbert forced a laugh, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Well, I didn't expect a sermon tonight. Kennedy's smile was small but heavy. You invited a senator, not a clown. For a second, the air in the room froze. Colbert's hand dropped the cue card. The crowd didn't laugh. They just watched. The studio fell heavier. Now the applause long faded, replaced by an uneasy stillness. Colbert set his cue cards aside, his usual weapon, and folded his hands. When he spoke again, his tone was softer, more careful. Senator, he said almost gently, do you ever regret the way you talk to people you offend? The crowd stirred. Wasn't a punchy question they expected. It felt personal, maybe even sincere. Kennedy tilted his head, thinking then in that slow Louisiana rhythm. He answered, every time I stayed silent to keep someone comfortable. He said, I regretted that more. No applause, no laughter, just silence. A deep, thoughtful quiet settled over the room like dust. Colbert blinked, realizing he wasn't steering this conversation anymore. He forced a small smile, tried to shift the weight. Senator, he said, half laughing, half admitting, you're not supposed to make me think this hard. My audience comes to laugh, not question their moral compass. Kennedy leaned back, unbothered. Maybe that's the problem, Stephen, with politics, with television, with all of it. Colbert raised an eyebrow, curious. Now, what problem? Kennedy's eyes locked on him. Too many people trying to feel right. He said, instead of be right. That line lingered like smoke. It wasn't loud, but it hit deep. You could see on the faces in the crowd, even Colbert's. He looked down, unsure had been humbled or enlightened. When he looked up, something in his expression had changed. Colbert broke the silence with a forced laugh, trying to shake off the weight. All right, Senator, he said, flashing his practiced grin. You win round one. But you can't charm your way through facts. Kennedy's chuckle was low, unhurried. Charm fades, Stephen. Facts don't let's trade some. That earned a few nervous laughs, but it didn't ease attention. Colbert tapped the next cue card. His expression colder, more deliberate. Some people, he said, carefully say your so-called honesty is what divides America. That may be. Your plain talk isn't bravery, it's pride. So tell me, Senator, are you a patriot or just another man who likes hearing himself talk? It was a kind of question that usually cornered guests, forcing them to stumble or soften. But Kennedy didn't blink. He looked Colbert straight in the eye, calm and unshaken. If telling the truth splits the room, he said, his voice steady, then maybe the room needed splitting. The audience gasped, a collective wave of breath filling the studio. Colbert froze. Mid-smile, Kennedy leaned forward slightly, his tone quieter, almost personal. The truth's not supposed to make everyone comfortable, Stephen. It's supposed to make everyone think. The crowd didn't clap, they just stared. Colbert adjusted his tie, searching for a quip, but none fit. He leaned forward again, his tone sharp and precise. You mock government spending for years, Senator, he said, waving a cue card like evidence, but your own state takes billions in federal aid. Isn't that just hypocrisy? With a smile, the crowd let out gasps and murmurs. It was a low blow, and everyone knew it, but Kennedy's smile was faint, almost kind. The kind that comes before a counterpunch when Washington Waste money. He said, his voice calm. It's a scandal. When Louisiana asked for its fair share of survival, the words landed clean to laughter that usually followed Colbert's barbs. Never came. Kennedy had turned the accusation into something human, something that hit harder than a punchline. Colbert forced a laugh, pivoting. So you get to decide who deserves what. That's convenient. Kennedy leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on Colbert's. No, he said slowly, I just refuse to let people who fly private tell my farmers they're greedy. That did. The crowd erupted, not polite applause, but raw, spontaneous clapping that crackled like electricity. Colbert sat back, blinking, his smirk faltering. As he realized this wasn't going his way, he tried a joke. But Kennedy wasn't done. He lowered his voice, speaking with quiet conviction. You talk for laughs, Stephen. He said, I talk for lives. That line hit like a hammer. The applause stopped cold, replaced by silence, the kind that demands respect. Colbert's smile vanished, his trademark with the thing that always gave him control was gone. The silence had weight now, making every shuffle and breath in the studio sound louder. Colbert sat back, exhaled slowly, and let a half-smile creep across his face. You're a good senator. He said, the humor gone, but the edge still there, real good, but honesty without empathy. He leaned forward, pointing lightly with his pen. That's just arrogance in disguise. Kennedy didn't react right away. He studied Colbert not as a rival, but as a man trying to prove something. Then he nodded slowly. Maybe, he said, but empathy without honesty. That pause, his voice steady as steel. That's cowardice in costume. A low murmur rippled through the audience. No laughs, no applause, just a sharp awareness of something raw and real. The studio lights hummed faintly, the only sound cutting to the tension. Colbert shifted in his chair, eyes darting to the camera, then back to Kennedy. The senator leaned, his voice quiet, but piercing. America's not dying from anger, Stephen. He said, it's dying from pretending everything's a joke. He let the silence stretch just long enough for the words to settle, then added softer, and tonight, it's not laughing. You could hear a pin drop. Colbert opened his mouth, then stopped. Nothing he could say would match that. He closed his mouth, exhaling through his nose, defeated, but oddly relieved. The two men sat in that silence, not as host and guest, but as two Americans on opposite sides of the same mirror. Finally, Colbert spoke, his voice quiet, stripped of performance. You know, he said, I invited you here to make a point. He hesitated, a faint smile flickering, but you made one instead. Kennedy nodded once, the faintest hint of smile returning. That's what plain talk does. He said, it leaves echoes. Colbert looked at him, really looked, and for the first time that night, there wasn't a hint of irony on his face, just respect. The air in the studio felt different now, quieter, heavier, but peaceful in a way no one expected. Colbert slowly set his cue cards down to sharp humor that carried him through every interview. Gone, he leaned forward, his voice softer than it had been all night. What drives you? Really, he asked, no setup, no wink to the audience, just a real question. Kennedy looked thoughtful, his eyes steady under the lights. Then he smiled, not the polite political kind, but something genuine. My dad used to say, don't just make a point, make a difference, he said. He paused and added quietly, I figure we'll die trying. It wasn't dramatic or rehearsed. It just felt real, the kind of line that lingers, reunites long after it's spoken. Colbert nodded slowly, and for the first time a grin he gave back wasn't for the camera. He stood smoothing his jacket and said, I think you just reminded us what decency sounds like. Kennedy rose to meeting his gaze, and maybe TV earned its keep tonight. They shook hands across the desk. No applause, no outro music, just silence, the kind that comes from respect, not restraint. The audience stayed still, almost afraid to break the spell as Kennedy turned and walked toward the wings. Colbert looked into the camera, his voice low and reflective. Sometimes, he said, truth doesn't need applause, just ears. The lights dimmed slowly, the crowd still silent. And for one rare moment in late-night television, no one laughed, no one shouted, no one tried to fill the air. It was a night the ambush turned into an awakening, but the story doesn't end there. That night wasn't just a moment, it was a spark. It was the kind of exchange that makes you stop, think, and question everything you thought you knew about politics, media, and the way we talk to each other. Colbert walked into that studio, thinking had controlled the narrative, but Kennedy flipped the script. He didn't just answer questions, he challenged the very game they were playing. And the audience, they didn't just watch, they felt. You could see it in their eyes, hear it in their silence. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was a mirror held up to America. And no one could look away. Let's rewind for a second and unpack why this mattered late night. TV thrives on predictability, quips, laughs, applause. Repeat is a formula that's worked for decades, and Colbert's one of its masters. He's built a career on disarming guests with humor, turning their words into punchlines before they can blink. But Kennedy, he didn't play that game. He didn't dodge or deflect. He leaned into every question, not with anger or defensiveness, but with a kind of quiet strength that set him here for something bigger than your applause. And that's what made this night different. It wasn't about winning a debate. It was about reminding everyone that truth isn't a soundbite. It's a responsibility. Think about the stakes here in a world where every headline is clickbait, every tweet is a gotcha, and every politician is a performer. Kennedy walked onto that stage and refused to play the part. He didn't try to charm a crowd or outweak Colbert. He spoke like a man who knows the weight of his words, who understands that what he says in that chair doesn't just echo in the studio, it ripples across the country. And Colbert, to his credit, didn't try to steamroll him. He could have leaned harder on the jokes, doubled down on the sarcasm, but he didn't. He listened. He let the moment breathe, and in doing so, he gave us something rare, a glimpse of what happens when two people stop performing and start talking. That's what made this night feel like a turning point. It wasn't just a senator outsmarting a comedian or a host losing control of his show. It was a reminder that we're starving for something real, conversations that don't just entertain, but challenge, words that don't just fill the air, but carry weight. Kennedy didn't come to win a popularity contest. He came to say what he believes, no matter how it landed. And Colbert, maybe for the first time in a long time, met someone who didn't bend under the spotlight. So what does this mean for us, for you? Sitting there reading this, wondering why a late-night interview feels like it matters. It's simple moments like this are rare, but they're not accidents. They happen when someone dares to speak without a script, when someone chooses truth over applause. And they remind us that we don't have to settle for the noise. We can demand more, not just from our leaders or our media, but from ourselves. Kennedy's words weren't just for Colbert or that studio audience. They were for all of us, a call to stop laughing at the problems and start facing them. Let's talk about Kennedy for a second. The man's no stranger to tough rooms. He's been in politics long enough to know how the game works. Say the right thing, smile for the cameras, don't rock the boat too hard. But that's not who he is. He's a guy who'll quote scripture in one breath and call out Washington's nonsense in next. He's a senator who sounds like your uncle at a barbecue, but with a steel spine and a moral compass that doesn't waver on that stage. He wasn't trying to be likable. He was trying to be honest, and in a world that rewards polish over principle, that's a radical act. Colbert, on the other hand, is a master of his craft. He spent years honing that quick wit, that ability to make you laugh, while slipping a dagger between the ribs. He's not cruel, but his relentless show is a machine designed to churn out viral moments and keep the audience clapping. But that night, the machine stalled not because Kennedy was funnier or smarter, but because he was realer. Colbert's used to guests who play along, who trade barbs and laugh at themselves. Kennedy didn't laugh at himself because he wasn't there to be a punchline. He was there to be a voice, and the audience, they were the third player in this drama. You could feel their energy shift as the night went on. At first, they were ready for the usual jokes, jabs, maybe a viral clip to share on X. But as Kennedy kept speaking, as Colbert's quips started falling flat, they changed. They stopped laughing on cue. They started listening. You could see it in their faces, that mix of surprise and respect, like they were witnessing something they didn't expect to see on late-night TV. They weren't just an audience anymore. They were witnesses to a moment that felt bigger than the show. That's the power of what happened. It wasn't just a good interview or a clever comeback. It was a crack in the facade, a reminder that we're capable of more than snark and sound bites. Kennedy didn't just challenge Colbert. He challenged all of us to think harder, to listen closer, to stop settling for the easy laugh. And Colbert, maybe without meaning to, gave him the platform to do it. That's what makes this story worth telling, worth remembering. It's not about who won or who lost. It's about what we saw, what we felt, and what we might do differently because of it. So where we go from here, that's the question. Isn't it moments like this don't happen every day, but they don't have their sparks, not fires? It's up to us to fan the flame. Share this story. Talk about it with your friends, your family, your co-workers. Ask yourself what it means to hear someone speak with conviction in a world that rewards spin. Ask what it means to listen, really listen, when the truth isn't comfortable or funny. Because that's what Kennedy did. He spoke, and that's what Colbert did. He listened, and that's what we can do every single day. If this moved, you don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel, our newsletter. Whatever keeps you in the loop, stay tuned for more moments like this, the ones that define character, truth, and courage in America's spotlight. Like, share, comment, tell us what you think. Because conversations like this one, they're not just entertainment, they're how change begins. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.